Hi, this is the third part of my story. If you haven't checked the first two parts, links in the description. Be warned, spoilers ahead. Part 3. The dinner. I drive to my parents' house on an October Saturday afternoon. The leaves are turning and the town looks exactly the way it always looks. Quiet, pretty, meticulously maintained. I have driven this road hundreds of times. I know every turn. I know the way the light hits the water tower at this time of day. I know the sound of the gravel under my tires when I pull into my parents' driveway. Everything is familiar. Nothing is the same. My mother meets me at the door with a hug and the smell of the dinner she promised, and a smile that is so genuinely warm that for a moment, just a moment, I almost lose my nerve. I don't. My father is in the living room. He stands when I come in, hugs me, asks about my drive. He looks older than the last time I visited. They both do. They are in their 60s now, retired, comfortable, settled into the life they built, the life they protected. We sit down to dinner. We talk about nothing. My job, the drive, the weather turning cold. My mother has made everything perfectly. My father pours wine. It is, on the surface, a perfectly ordinary family dinner. And then, the doorbell rings. My mother starts to get up. "I'll get it," I say. She sits back down. My father takes a sip of wine. Neither of them is paying particular attention. I open the front door. Nora is standing on the porch in her coat, with her hands clasped in front of her and her jaw set, and her eyes, our eyes, steady and clear. She nods at me once. I step aside and let her in. I will tell you what I remember about the next 30 seconds, because I have replayed them so many times they have become almost cinematic in my memory. My mother hears footsteps and turns in her chair with the automatic smile of someone expecting a neighbor or a friend. The smile stops. It doesn't fall slowly. It doesn't fade. It stops, like a power cut, like something switched off at the source. My father turns a half second later. He goes the color of the tablecloth, and Nora walks into the dining room of the house where she was supposed to have been raised and stands at the head of the table and looks at the two people who gave her away and says, with a composure I will spend the rest of my life admiring, "Hello, I think it's time we met." What happens next is not a movie moment. I want to be honest about that, because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves drama. My mother doesn't confess immediately. My father doesn't break down. There is no single moment where everything cracks open and the truth pours out cleanly. What there is my mother's hand shaking so hard she has to put down her wine glass. What there is my father saying Nora's name, not the name on the headstone, her real name, Nora, which means he always knew it, which means somewhere in 31 years of Sunday dinners and birthday calls and white flowers on a grave, he was carrying her real name and never said it out loud once. I ask him how he knows her name. He can't answer me. My mother can. She talks for a long time. And the story that comes out is both exactly what we suspected and somehow worse than we were prepared for. Robert Calloway's complaint was going to end my father's career. More than that, there were aspects of it that could have led to criminal charges. My father had made a mistake, a real one. A patient had suffered because of it, and Robert Calloway, who had resources and connections and a very good lawyer, was going to make sure the world knew. My father went to him, not through lawyers, personally, man to man. He went to Robert Calloway's house and he sat across from him and he asked what it would take. Robert Calloway and his wife had wanted a child for years. They had been through failed adoptions, failed applications, years of waiting and disappointment. And here was a doctor sitting in his living room asking what it would take. The negotiation, and my mother uses that word, negotiation, and I will never forgive her for how calmly she says it, took 2 meetings. By the time my mother was 7 months pregnant, they had an agreement. If she delivered twins, one would go to the Calloways. The complaint would be permanently withdrawn. My father's career would be saved. My mother cries when she tells me this. I watch her cry and I feel something I don't have a clean word for. It isn't sympathy. It isn't contempt. It is the specific grief of realizing that the person who hurt you most is also a person, complicated, frightened, capable of love, and also capable of this. She said she held Nora for 2 hours before they took her. She says she is sorry every single day. She said she thought it was the only way. I look at her for a long time, and then I say, "You built her a grave. You took me there every year. You put flowers on it. You let me grieve a person who was alive. That wasn't survival, Mom. That was a choice. You made it over and over again for 31 years. Don't tell me it was the only way." She doesn't have an answer for that. Neither does my father. Nora hasn't said much through all of this. She has been sitting at that table listening with the careful stillness of someone who has been preparing for this conversation for a long time and is now simply letting it be what it is. When my mother finishes, she looks at her for a long moment, and then she says something I didn't expect. She says, "I had a good life.
I want you to know that. Not because you deserve the comfort of knowing it, but because it's true, and it's mine, and I'm proud of it. The people who raised me are good people. What you did, giving me to them, might have been done for the worst reasons, but it didn't ruin me. She pauses. What it did was take something from me that I can't get back. 31 years of a sister. 31 years of knowing where I came from. You don't get to decide that that's okay just because I turned out fine. My mother nods. She is crying too hard to speak. My father hasn't looked up from the table in 10 minutes. We leave together. Nora and I walk out of that house side by side, and we get in my car and we sit in the driveway for a moment in the dark, and neither of us speaks. Then she says, "Are you okay?" And I laughed because only my sister, the sister I didn't have for 31 years, would come to that house and do what she just did and then immediately ask if I was okay. "No," I say honestly. "Are you?" "No," she says. "Then I'm glad I knocked on your door." And I reach over and hug her, really hug her, the way you hug someone you've known your whole life. And she hugs me back, and we stay like that for a long time in the driveway of the house that kept us apart. I won't tell you that everything is resolved. It isn't. My relationship with my parents is complicated, fractured in ways I'm still mapping. There are days I answer when my mother calls and days I can't. My father and I have barely spoken. Some wounds don't close quickly and some might not close at all, and I'm learning to be honest about that instead of rushing to the forgiveness I'm not ready for. Robert Calloway, Nora's father, knows she found me. He called her the night after the dinner. She said it was the hardest conversation of her life. He isn't a villain in her story, even if he plays a complicated role in mine. People, I'm learning, rarely fit the shapes we need them to fit. What I can tell you is this. Last month, Nora and her husband came to my city for a long weekend. We walked around my neighborhood and I showed her the places that matter to me, and she told me stories about growing up, and we ate at my favorite restaurant and talked until 2 a.m. about everything and nothing. On the last morning before she drove home, she went to get coffee and she reached across the table and put a small wrapped box in front of me. I opened it. Inside was a photo. A copy of the one from my nightstand, the 2 babies in the hospital bassinet. But she'd had it printed larger and framed, and on the back she had written in her handwriting, 31 years late, but here. I have a sister. I have always had a sister. It just took 31 years and one Tuesday afternoon doorbell and more courage than I knew either of us had to find our way to each other. Some things that are taken from you can be taken back. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Enough to start. If you made it to the end of this story, then you already know it isn't really about the lie. It's about what survives the lie. We were separated by a decision we had no say in. We grew up in different houses in different states, living parallel lives we didn't know were parallel. And then she was brave enough to knock on my door. That's it. That's the whole miracle. 2 sisters and a door. I think about how easily it could have gone differently. What if Nora had decided the risk wasn't worth it? What if I had looked through the peephole and not answered? What if fear had won on either side? It almost did. She told me she stood at my door for 4 minutes before she rang the bell. 4 minutes between 31 more years of not knowing and everything. If you are carrying something like this, a door you haven't knocked on, a conversation you've been circling for years, a person you've been almost brave enough to reach out to, I ask you to think about those 4 minutes. See you in the next one.